Hello, everyone. This is Kara Parfit. I am the Manager of Marketing and Sales Support here at Cerdant, and I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us today for this talk on wireless LAN security standards. Just a quick reminder, if you have any questions during the presentation, we're here to answer those. Please use the Q&A box on your control panel. We'll also be recording the event for playback at your convenience and sharing within your organization. So presenting today is Cerdant Engineering Team Manager and Resident Wireless Guru, Sam Sexton. He's done a few wireless talks for us. So for those of you who have heard him speak before, hopefully this is as good as he's ever been. But for those of you who are new, he is quite skilled in this arena. Sam has been with Cerdant for over 5 years now. He started off as a network analyst and worked his way onto the engineering team, and now eventually as the manager of the engineering team. So while at Cerdant, he spends his time primarily on security and wireless design and deployment. So I won't take any more time away from him. Kick it off here, Sam.
Well, thank you, Kara, for that introduction. First off, I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time to be with us today. As you said, I'm Sam Sexton, the Manager of Network Engineering here at Cerdant. And yes, lately a lot of my time has been focused on wireless and wireless deployments. For those of you who are joining me again, thank you for taking the time to hear me speak again. I know we've discussed about wireless design and pitfalls of wireless design, but today the most common questions, honestly, I receive when we're doing a deployment outside of where to put the access point is what should we be doing for our wireless security, or how should we set it up? Now, this talk really goes beyond vendor from a basic standpoint, and is really about the different forms or levels of security that a wireless solution offers and how to protect your network. We will not, though, be diving into port security or how to set up your firewall from a wireless standpoint, but really the wireless security for the network in general and how people are authenticating and how they're handling authentication. So with this, we're going to ask 3 questions with each wireless solution that we discuss. And those 3 questions are going to first be, are we secure? Obviously, in any production wireless network we deploy, or even one for our employees for their own devices, we want to have a secure environment to operate in. Again, especially in the production world, we want to know that our data is safe and that only the users we want to connect are connected. What's the ease of management with that solution? Now, a lot of these are tied together, and ease of management really ties into the security aspect, meaning that day one, we may deploy the most secure solution or a solution we are very happy with from a security standpoint, but if the management or maintaining this wireless solution or wireless network is too great in the time cost or the labor cost, do we maintain a high level of security? Meaning that day one we may be secure, but are we secure day 100 or day 300 or year 2? And if the ease of management is too great, we'll slowly see degradation in that security aspect and in that score. So we want to pick a solution that we can manage and maintain a high level of security. And then finally, is our solution scalable? While we may pick a solution that is great for a singular office or an SMB that is, let's say, below 50 people or 100 people, what happens when we're 1,000 employees scattered across 15 locations, or we're 3,000 employees over 50 locations? How do we still have a secure and easy to manage environment that protects our production network? Now, to know where we're going, we want to review where we've been. And even though some of these security standards may seem a little outdated, in most vendors and in most wireless solutions, they are still options, and it may come as a surprise to everyone, but I still occasionally see these in the wild. So we really want to cover the entire gambit and timeline of wireless security. Now, for starters, in 1997 was when we finally got away from open wireless. And the volunteers at IEEE came up with the first protection standard, which was called WEP, or Wired Equivalent Privacy. And this is part of the 802.11 standard. It finally got us away from open Wi-Fi where people can just sniff all of your traffic. It used pre-shared keys, which are shared among all the APs and all the users, and they connect using these pre-shared keys. Normally it's 1 to 4 keys. Now, while it does stop that casual sniffing I mentioned, an experienced hacker in today's day and age can crack WEP in about 5 to 15 minutes. And this is really because it has numerous flaws and numerous vulnerabilities. Now, we could take a whole webinar presentation to discuss all the different ways the WEP is flawed and how we could crack WEP and how we could gain access to your network if you were to still use something at this level. But to save time, I just want to quickly review in a brief summary all the vulnerabilities and flaws that WEP has to offer today. Now, I hope you caught that, but just know it's numerous, and it is something that we should not use even if it's offered by a wireless solution you're currently using today. So how does WEP grade out against our 3 questions? Well, this will be the fastest one to discuss because, as I said before, you shouldn't use it. It is a terrible solution, and we're just going to automatically fail it. So now that we got that out of the way, let's focus on some solutions that actually are more viable for our network. Now, because WEP was hacked pretty quickly and had multiple flaws and vulnerabilities, the Wi-Fi Alliance, which was formed early in the 2000s, wanted to find a solution. And what the Wi-Fi Alliance is, it's a group of wireless vendors who came together looking to put an end to WEP and again, find an answer to a problem. Now, when they formed WPA version 1, it wasn't a standard like WEP in the 802.11 from IEEE, but just an answer. It was an answer to a problem, which was WEP. And with this answer, while it still had some flaws, it started the conversation and moved it into the right direction. However, it needed to be revised so it can meet the standards that were put in place by IEEE, which developed WPA version 2, which was then released in 2004. And this was mainly a security upgrade. The big piece of this security upgrade was AES encryption. Now, when 802.11i was released by IEEE, it required that the encryption method needed to be AES. WPA version 1, which again wasn't a standard, wasn't a framework, used TKIP. So it didn't meet all the needs, the mandatory standards put in place by IEEE. WPA version 2 did because it did support AES and still supports TKIP. Now, while WPA version 1 is still used today, and we see occasionally in the wild for things such as handheld scanners in warehouses and whatnot, we're not going to be grading version 1. We're really going to focus on version 2. Again, version 1 shouldn't really ever be used except for legacy devices, again, on a case-by-case basis. And if you do use it, please segment out that network and keep it only for those devices and limit what they can go to, what they can touch, where they can visit. Really keep it segmented to absolutely as little as possible because it is an older standard on older encryption. But if we focus on WPA2, that enhanced version of WPA, we also have to mention that there have been some vulnerabilities over the years. Obviously, this was formed in 2014, so it's been some time that it's been out in the wild, and as you know, hackers and security professionals alike are always going to look for vulnerabilities. The biggest one found was crack, where exploiting the 4-way handshake, when users authenticated to WPA2 wireless, they're able to extract certain pieces of information, such as the encrypted key, and then using a brute force attack, can attack that key and eventually gain access to your network. Now, with WPA2, if we look at our grades, the biggest thing to remember from a security standpoint is we're mostly incomplete. While crack in some instances have been patched, but there are other ways to exploit WPA2 and hack that password, the complexity of your password helps you buy some time before somebody could take action and brute force your piece. While it's not unsecure or insecure, it isn't the most secure. So we're really giving it an incomplete grade from a security standpoint. When we look at WPA2 ease of management, this is where it really falls flat and is its lowest category that I'd rate it. And the reason being, and a lot of you are probably thinking, well, I use WPA2 and it's not that hard to manage. WPA2 really becomes an issue the larger you grow. So if you just have 10, 15, 20 devices in your environment that use WPA2, standard PSK, there's a couple questions I'd want you to think about. The first being, every time somebody leaves their company, let it be they're fired, they retire, or they move on to other opportunities, if they were a production wireless user, did you change the passphrase every single time? If the answer is yes, that's awesome, and hopefully you didn't have to take the time to change too many devices. But if your company is continuously scaling outward and is growing and more employees are taking advantage of wireless, if you're using WPA2, it becomes very cumbersome to constantly change all the laptops, all the tablets, all the devices that need updated every single time somebody leaves. This is where ease of management can directly affect that security score. So you may have a very secure password that is complex and hard to remember, that you input into every laptop you put out into the wild. But you now have 1,000 laptops. Are you updating that passphrase on a regular basis? Are you updating that passphrase every time somebody who had access to a laptop has left the company? The reason you want to think about these things is in a Windows 10 environment, depending on how much access somebody has and what rights they have, they potentially can even see that passphrase in an unencrypted fashion. So the greater the number of users you have, the greater number of devices you have, it becomes very hard to maintain that. Another solution we've seen from time to time is networks or network admins will email out the WPA2 production password to everyone or to everyone that needs it. Well, now you've shared that password with everyone, and now can they connect devices you don't want connected, such as their personal laptops, which could be infected, or iPhones or Android tablets to absorb your bandwidth. You really want to keep this on lock and key, and to do that with WPA2 becomes very complicated. However, it is very scalable, and this is where a lot of people use WPA2. If you have the same SSID and passphrase at every single one of your locations, your sales individuals or people who travel from site to site can seamlessly move from building to building and will auto-authenticate and connect to the wireless. This is incredibly convenient and one of the best features of WPA2. However, this directly affects that ease of management. The larger you are and the easier it gets for your employees, the harder it is to maintain security. Overall, we would give it a B- because it does have some pros, but there also are some cons you should consider if you want to deploy a standard WPA2 passphrase environment. Now, because of crack and the fact that WPA2 has been found to have numerous vulnerabilities, WPA3 has been developed and is currently in testing and was formed in 2018 and is the true successor to WPA2. And while it has numerous upgrades, there are just a couple I really want to point out. The first being privacy over public Wi-Fi. Now this, in my personal opinion, is a game changer because right now, if you go to an airport or a coffee shop or some type of open Wi-Fi area that we traditionally just connect to and start using, you're leaving your packets open for sniffing, for other people to examine and extrapolate because there is no encryption. You're not forming a direct encrypted connection to that access point. With WPA3, even on open Wi-Fi, you will form through its Dragonfly handshake an encrypted session between you and the access point, allowing you to have privacy like never before. This same privacy flows into the personal networks. One of the security flaws with WPA2 is if we all share the same passphrase, I can view or anybody can view all the traffic that's being transmitted on that secure network. So while you may feel you're secure and nobody can see your traffic because you're using your passphrase, if somebody wants to do something malicious and gains your passphrase, which is why you should change it all the time, they can start to sniff everybody else's traffic. In WPA3, that ceases to be a problem because each individual person is forming a direct tunnel back to the AP, an encrypted session. Now, because of this handshake and because of that encrypted session, it does also help against things like the crack vulnerability and brute force attacks. WPA3 at the core has something called the Dragonfly handshake or the simultaneous authentication of equals. Actually, if you were to log into one of your access points or routers or something that uses or offers WPA3 as a potential option, you might even say WPA3-SAE. unlike how WPA2 is WPA2-PSK, right? That SAE, or simultaneous authentication of equals handshake, is what really protects against a lot of the flaws of WPA2 and adds that extra layer of security when a device authenticates to give you a clean one-to-one session between yourself and the access point. Now, even though WPA3 looks to be a significant game changer, there are some problems out there because it still really is in a pilot and testing phase, the main one being Dragon Blood. And if you were to research this, you'd see numerous articles about flaws in WPA3 and how people can exploit that new handshake and find ways to lower your security, lower your authentication method to then exploit you through other past exploits and other ways of cracking passwords. The key to know here is that you should always apply security patches not only to your personal devices, your production devices, but also your access points, routers, anything that you're using to deploy something like WPA3. A lot of this is going to be fixed with patches and security updates. But as WPA3 goes through the research and pilot process, there could be still some additional items that need to be patched. So always apply those patches so when WPA3 is ready for mainstream production, your devices are as secure as possible. So if we dive into the grades and what WPA3 really offers, it's hard for us to give it an accurate score. Do we grade it on what it is today, which is a flawed product, or do we grade it on what it will be once it's been fully patched and all vulnerabilities and pieces have been flushed out? Because if we grade it on what it will be a very secure option as compared to WPA2. The ease of management will always be a problem if we use one passphrase because, again, while maybe nobody can sniff other packets if they keep an old passphrase active and join the network, they still may gain access to production equipment, right? So if maybe I can't sniff my neighbor's packets, but I can still access your file server. So we still want to upgrade those passphrases, and if we have a lot of devices, that will create a problem. But like WPA2, WPA3 is highly scalable. If we look at what it currently is, it is a flawed solution that is not secure. It doesn't have great ease of management, but still is scalable. But would you want to scale an insecure product? So overall, we're going to give it an in-progress grade because we're looking at two sides of the coin on what it will be and what it is today. And while I'm very excited for what it will become, it's not ready to be used in production at this time. Finally, we have Enterprise, a wireless enterprise based on 802.1x. Now, this is supported in both WPA2 and WPA3, but does require some additional pieces of technology, such as a radius server to handle the authentication for the 802.1x standard. Now, there are three forms of authentication, first being password-based, and that's pretty standard. That is a username and a password linked back to Active Directory or domain controller with a radius server acting as an intermediary. Now, even in Windows 10, this becomes very convenient because if you authenticate your user with your AD credentials in Windows 10 and then try to authenticate to a wireless solution that is WPA2 Enterprise, right then and there, it will just ask you if you want to continue using your current authenticated credentials. You can say yes, and you're on the wireless, and that is incredibly convenient. A token-based authentication would be if your IT department gave out like a keychain or some kind of time-synced device that has a randomly generated passphrase that can be used and authenticated to the network passing through the radius server. And finally, certificate-based authentication, which would be installing a certificate on a company device, allowing it to authenticate to the wireless. Now, the big key with enterprise wireless, even if it is WPA2, is because each person is using a personalized form of authentication, either password, token, or certificate, it does allow all things to be encrypted, and you have that tunnel aspect similar to WPA3, where no sniffing is allowed. If we grade out enterprise wireless, first and foremost, from a security standpoint, it is the most secure solution that we're granted or that is offered to us in a standard wireless setup or wireless vendor. Ease of management is also great because overall, if we need to add or remove users or we need to relinquish somebody's access, we either delete their user in Active Directory, we recover their token, right? And if for some reason we cannot recover their token, we can disable its access or that time sync, or we can disable whatever code it will generate. And if it's a certificate-based piece, we hopefully are also, reconfiscating their laptop or whatever device we gave them where we applied that certificate, taking away their access. And so each individual has their own piece. We don't have to worry if we have 1,000 employees and we fire somebody. We just have to disable that one. So now we have 999 active possible wireless users and one disabled. However, scalability does become a question. Now, for those of you that use 802.1x or enterprise wireless right now, maybe wondering how is this a question or why is it a problem? If you're in one building and you have your multiple radius servers for failover, it's really not a problem. Where it comes into is if you start to formulate or start to push out to numerous branches or numerous buildings. Do you install radius servers at each building? Do you install the pieces needed for individuals to authenticate at every single building? If so, you need to manage those. And now that's another layer or possible place of failure. If you point everybody back to the main hub or your main HQ or a colo, what happens if a VPN, if that's how you're connecting, goes down? Do you lose access to production Wi-Fi? These are questions that, while we won't fail or say enterprise wireless doesn't, answer the call for scalability, it does add extra layers of complexity that can impact ease of management or impact the time needed to deploy enterprise wireless on a grand scale. Overall, we would give it a B+, and it really is a strong solution, but with scalability questions. So what should we be doing today if given the option? First and foremost, let's go back to our 3 questions. If we're concerned about security, enterprise wireless is the answer. If we're concerned about ease of management, enterprise wireless, again, in my personal opinion, would be the best solution. But what about radius, right? What about all the radius servers we need? What about those pieces we're managing? While it's easy to manage on a user and security basis, there's a hardware component that we now need to maintain and upkeep to make sure that people can even authenticate. Scalability, if we think about scalability, honestly, WPA2 is the best solution for scalability, but it's not as secure as other options. While enterprise wireless on a smaller scale is easy to deploy, and we're not as concerned, that seems like the best option. But really, from my point of view, when I look at these 3 core questions that I always pose to our customers when I'm answering this conundrum, is it's as if we have 3 one-gallon buckets for security, ease of management, and scalability, but we're only given 2 gallons of water. So if we want the most secure and the highest ease of management, scalability may take a hit. And it might be complicated to build out the solution we need. Or if we want ease of management and scalability, security is what takes a hit. So we never quite can fill all 3 buckets all the way, which is unfortunate because you would hope that we have something that we truly can meet all 3 criteria. So really you have to ask yourself, what is most important to you? Is it this general security? Is it the time and ease of management? Or is it how scalable a solution is? Now, with that, I'd like to thank you for your time because those are the options that we have to us today. We have WEP, which you should never use, WPA, which is really just a legacy piece, WPA2, which is a okay solution in most environments that are smaller. It's while very scalable, the ease of management becomes very complex the larger the scale gets. We have WPA3, which really we're not ready for. I personally wouldn't use. It's still really in a research and pilot phase. And then we have enterprise wireless, which is linked to WPA2 and WPA3, and it's a pretty strong solution, and honestly, the one that I recommend when working with customers in a general wireless environment. But it makes me wonder, what if there was a 6th option? And what would that option look like if we could somehow take the best pieces of each of these and formulate something that covers all our bases, that adds that extra gallon of water? Well, luckily in 2008, a wireless vendor by the name of Aerohive developed PPSK, or Personal Pre-Shared Key. Now what this does is it segments your connection based on which key you're putting in. And what I mean by segments your connection is it can apply different VLANs, different networks, and different policies with a simple key. Now this key is similar to WPA2, but has benefits of enterprise and more. To make it somewhat visual, if you look at the picture we have on the screen here, think of 3 devices that each have their own key to authenticate to a wireless network. And because of that key, I know if the device is a bring your own device piece. I know if it's part of my guest network, and I know if it's, you know, a thermostat or something that part of the Internet of Things, just because of the key. I may not know what the device is, but the key has acknowledged what the device is. And then we could segment that device into proper security policies. The best way I can describe it is truly think of your standard WPA2 environment and think of enterprise and all the things you love of both of those two solutions, let it be the scalability or the security or the ease of management, and collide them together, and you develop PPSK. So, but how does it work? So at the heart of PPSK, you have layers of control. The first layer is your user groups. This is just like Active Directory. It could be marketing versus sales. It can be all employees versus vendors or guests. However you want to break up your user groups, just as you break them up in Active Directory or would break them up in Enterprise Wireless, you would do that in PPSK. Those user groups funnel into user profiles. Now, a user profile contains multiple components, but the 2 key pieces that we're really going to focus on today is the network and VLAN that user is associated with and the security policies they then pull. And by security policies, we're going to simplify it and really talk about rules or rule sets and access, right? Now, some of your rule sets are going to be controlled by a network or VLAN. If in your environment you have a guest network that only is allowed to go to the internet, if you could assign that VLAN in your wireless solution, you only have access to the internet. Vice versa, if you have a production network which has access to key servers in your environment, if you're part of that network and VLAN, you're granted that access. But with PPSK on top of that network access piece that maybe goes through your firewall, we can add in additional security policies to help control the flow of traffic. And all of this is assigned to individual devices and or users through assignment rules. And those assignment rules can have multiple criteria or just one criteria to place people from different user groups into the proper profile, granting them their network access and their security policy. Now, before we get into what this would look like and how it would be built out in a real environment, we first need to talk about the database. So with all things, if it's Active Directory with Enterprise or, token, you have to keep a database of all the tokens that you have out there. There always is a database when everybody has their own key or their own access. It's no different with Aerohive and PPSK. The first type of database is a cloud database. Now, this has a significant benefit in that it allows instant updates, meaning that the second I hit save on a user, that user and all the rules that user is associated to are instantly active. Now, if I have to make a full network change, obviously that needs to be pushed down, but this is just the user database. So I can add and remove users at will, and the updates happen instantly. For a negative, it does require an internet access to be useful, meaning if the internet were to go down, just like in that enterprise solution where maybe we have a VPN tunnel back to HQ where we would authenticate through Radius and Active Directory, if the internet is down, no one can now authenticate and gain access. One really interesting thing, and that I would invite you to research or feel free to ask us about, though, with the cloud database, is it integrates with something called PPSK kiosk. And this is really cool software and functionality that allows you to generate wireless keys instantly for users that walk into your building. This can only be done with the cloud database, and what this means is if when a guest comes into your building, instead of using the universal password that every guest ever has used when they come in, on a single Android or Apple tablet, they would type in their name, phone number, and email, and the company they're from as they come to visit you, click Save, and they'd be generated a time-stamped temporary key to join your wireless. That key would be only for them. They'd have that security of that individual tunnel back to the access point. But at the end of the 8-hour day or at the end of 4 hours or whatever time you deem reasonable, that key would be purged from your database and can never be used again. This only can be done with a cloud database. The other database is a local database. Now, with a local database, we must push all user changes to the access points. The access points have the power and the control of the database in this scenario. However, if the internet goes down, people can still authenticate. But if we were to let someone go or hire someone new who needs wireless access, we have to make sure to push those changes to our access points using our cloud platform. Now, the last thing I really want to point out concerning the databases is that we can't use a mix of both cloud and local databases for a solution. That's actually what we use here at Cerdant. Our general guests use a cloud database so we can make instant changes, adding and removing guests or vendors. But our employees, especially on our production side, are a local database, so if the internet were to go down, we still have access to local resources. Now, to give you a visual of how this would work, if a user authenticated to an SSID using a cloud database passphrase, that access point would reach out on behalf of the user to the Aerohive cloud, since the user has yet to authenticate, receive a yes or no signal. If yes, they then gain access to the internet. In a local database scenario, if you have multiple access points in your building, they will divvy up the responsibility, and some of the access points will act as a local RADSec server, and they will hold the user database. Now, every Aerohive is hardware encrypted with a TPM chip, so you don't have to worry about the user database and the user data actually being encrypted. When a user were to authenticate to an access point, if the access point at first were to authenticate to is not one that holds a database, it would reach out to another to gain access, granting you internet availability. If the internet were to go down and you still needed access to local resources, your device would still follow the same process, gain authentication, and access to local resources. Now, to visualize what this would look like both on a firewall and a wireless setup, I'm going to call back to some slides from that security conference where we first presented this before we enter our live demo. So if we were to set up a SonicWALL, and this is what the SonicWALL looked like at our security conference, to have multiple SSIDs, multiple segment networks, we need to have multiple VLANs. So as you can see here, I have 5 VLANs and networks that are all dedicated to different types of wireless. Let it be vendor, IoT, employee Wi-Fi, which would be production, employee bring your own device, and a guest network. For the next few slides, I really want us to pay attention to the X2 VLAN 35 or employee Wi-Fi network that ends in 172.16.35, and it's a /24. As we segment our users, and in a traditional Wi-Fi sense, as we segment via SSID and users authenticate with one passphrase, people would pull different CFS lists. This is pretty common in a SonicWALL setup. We authenticate, we gain access, we can or cannot reach certain websites, and it's all done by network. If we focus on the employee Wi-Fi piece, they pull Conference 2019 List 2, and they have a specialized CFS list just for them when they go out to the internet. Now, to make this happen in traditional sense, for traditional Wi-Fi, with all those networks I showed you and those 5 VLANs, I would need an SSID for guest, I would need an SSID for employee production, an SSID for your bring your own device network. If I want to segment out my Internet of Things items like thermostats or lighting systems, projectors, and whatnot, that would go on one network. And pretty common, a lot of customers of ours have vendor networks where people can authenticate and just gain access to a few servers or a few items where they maybe help maintain and manage. In a PPSK environment, and this may seem hard to wrap your mind around or fathom, all of this can be done in one SSID. So that means 5 SSIDs in traditional, 1 in PPSK. And if I want to keep adding in more VLANs and more networks, it still is just one SSID. Now, if we go under the hood and look at, again, the SonicWALL piece, remember we had those 5 networks. This is a screenshot from the standard setup that we used with the BPSK environment at the conference. Again, if we're going to focus on employee Wi-Fi, notice that we have an employee assignment. If we work backwards on those layers of control, an assignment or assignment rule grants people certain security policies. A security policy, which that would be a security policy there, remember, grants certain access and certain VLANs. So in this case, we have multiple VLANs. You see we have an employee Wi-Fi VLAN, which would be that VLAN 35. I also have a VLAN for BYOD, Internet of Things, vendors, and at the very top, you may see a default user profile, meaning if you do not meet any of these rules, you fall into our general guest network. Now with these, if you look, there are 2 employee Wi-Fi VLANs, 2 security policies associated to the same VLAN, and we're going to dive into what that means and why that's important. So if we look at the standard employee Wi-Fi security policy, again, we're going to follow the employee Wi-Fi production all the way through. We still see where the VLAN was applied. It's that VLAN 35. And then we have the security components, which can be firewall rules, QoS, date and time that it's available to access, an availability schedule, all these different pieces. If we want to encrypt the traffic and tunnel it somewhere else, we have traffic tunneling. But really here we're going to focus on firewall rules. And the one rule that we had in the security conference, if you were lucky enough to get the production Wi-Fi, which was stopping SonicWALL management. Now why is this important to do it on the access point versus doing it on the firewall? If I want to stop SonicWALL management for just a select group of people, but not everyone, I could do that through these security policies, meaning all general employees who need production access, I could put them on the production wireless network, but take away their access to the SonicWALL. But if I'm in a specific user group, such as the secondary one we see here that still has the employee Wi-Fi access, but I have a specific MAC address, in this case it would be my laptop, I have elevated rights in a different policy granting me access to the SonicWALL. So instead of needing to constantly segment out via multiple networks who can and who can't do some items, you can limit it on the firewall. Or not the firewall, but on the firewall access for the access. So with that, I really would like to dive in and show some of this live now that we have some key things we're going to look at and look for in a live environment. With all live demos, as you're probably used to hearing, cross your fingers with me because, again, this will be a live demonstration. And while we always hope that everything goes exactly, that I click on the right things and everything is beautiful and perfect, please know that, this is live. So what do we want to look out for? First and foremost, if we're going by our questions, it's going to be security. And I'm going to show you where we can put in, the complexity of the password, but also, as a bonus, how we have more control using PPSK, and we can limit who can and who can't do certain things through rules and access. The ease of management of the solution. How quickly can I add or remove users? Finally, scalability, and as a bonus, visibility. One of the main problems that people always ask us when they look at reports or look at data through their firewall is, who is this person and how do I stop them from accessing X? they're abusing Netflix. So we allow people to use Netflix at lunch, but they're streaming gigs of it. But I don't know who it is because it's just an IP address. It's just a MAC address. With PPSK, I can give you greater visibility, or we can give you greater visibility in who that is. So one moment here, and we'll pull up our wireless piece. Just going to re-authenticate here. Now, I will warn everyone with this as I pull it over here once we are authenticated, is that AeroHive is very beautiful, and there's a lot of information that's going to be thrown at you right now. And the key thing that I can say is I'm going to try to point all of us into the areas that we really need to focus into, but there is a lot that we're going to see as we navigate through this, but we will not have enough time to cover it all. So as we log in, we see our dashboard. And the key thing here and what we want to focus on is PPSK and how PPSK influences this dashboard. First and foremost, over the right here, if you follow my mouse, you're going to see clients. Now, some of these, we have a pretty good idea of who they are because they've typed in a host name that makes sense, right? A client being a device, a user being the actual person. For example, Kara here has labeled herself Kara's iPhone, so I know that's hers. But what if somebody has a non-unique name or something that I can't directly correlate who that person is, such as Truffle Shuffle? So here's a device called Truffle Shuffle, and I don't know whose device this is. But because we use PPSK, I know that this user is Kevin Roberts, one of my security engineers. So in this environment, when you get that IP address and you get that MAC address or that host name, you're going to get all the data that you would in a traditional wireless sense, but you're going to get so much more because you're going to know the user, and now you can take action if needed. Now, in this sense, when we go deeper and click on the actual user, we're going to see the devices that are associated with them. So while, again, that previous screen for Client 360 had a lot of really cool data, I don't want to take all the time we have to focus on that. We want to focus on PPSK and the security aspect from a user standpoint. Here, if I look at Kevin Roberts, I see that he has two clients who have been authenticated using his PPSK device. The first is an Apple Watch. The second is his Apple iPhone, which is currently connected to our guest SSID for employees, and his PPSK is only currently being used by one device. Now, I could track him as a user and look at his past 24 hours or his past 30 days. And what he's done as an individual user on our wireless network. In this case, we can see applications such as Instagram or when he's in the office versus not in the office. I can tell you this is weeks and weekends, right? And we could see different pieces of his history based on the user, not the device, because one user can have multiple devices. And finally, currently he is connected, and I know he's connected to this access point in our office. And while this is great from a visibility standpoint, we still need to talk about security, ease of management, and control. So if we go to configuration, the biggest thing from a scalability standpoint is to know that in AeroHive with PPSK, we're linked to network policies. And since this is a cloud solution, these policies can be pushed out to any location in the world. They can be pushed out to multiple locations or one location. The specific policy we're going to focus on here at first is actually our certain production policy. And we're going to look at the wireless networks that we offer. Now, the one that we're going to focus on here mainly today is actually our guest wireless. Now, if we wanted, we could shrink these two SSIDs to one, but because we're constantly testing items, we actually separate our employee and our guest. Now, we may tie multiple VLANs to one of these to take full advantage of PPSK, but based on SSID, some settings, such as transmit rates from your access point or radio, testing, some specific pieces with, 802.11n or 802.1ac or AX. Some of those pieces are tied to SSIDs, so we do still maintain 2 for lab purposes. But on this singular SSID, we really want to focus on the PPSK aspect. So if you remember our layers of control, I talked about first and foremost user groups. These are the 3 user groups that are allowed to use this SSID. Now, under the database location, you will see there are 2 types, service and device. Anything that says service, that is in the cloud. Anything that is device, that is local to the access points and can still be accessed if the internet is down. These user groups then filter into user profiles. So in this scenario, we have 3 assignment rules, and depending on what that assignment rule has, let it be linked to a user group or linked to a operating system or MAC address, they'll pull specific policies. I'd like to focus on one policy here to show you that, they're all currently attached to the same VLAN, but this could be VLAN 10, VLAN 20, VLAN 30, and they could have different firewall policies that are SonicWALL or whatever edge device you have. But in this case, with our guest network, I wanted to show you how PPSK can grant you additional control just from the security policy they pulled. So if we click on our restricted guests here, you'll see first and foremost, again, we're assigning them our guest network VLAN 10. But we have numerous access rules in place. And what these access rules are currently doing is first allowing DHCP and DNS to anything locally. Now this is a nice little piece because even though it's guest, if I wanted to have DHCP be my main DHCP server and I'm using something like IP Helper, I want this network to have some access locally, or I want it to have local access to the firewall to gain DHCP. So I want to keep that open, and same with DNS. Maybe I point them to local DNS or I point them to public. I have, my choice. But right from the get-go, we're going to stop SMTP, and we're going to stop anything to local networks. Now, if you look at our rules here, I then have a rule that permits all traffic, but man, I really wanted to block SMTP UDP below. This is where ease of management comes in. I see that my rule set isn't exactly how I want it to be. Before my allow all rule, I want to make sure to stop another form of SMTP. I can make a change and update my profile, finally saving my network policy. Because I saved that network policy, I can now deploy this change to every access point in the certain production network with just a few extra clicks. Just picking the devices I want to deploy it to and pushing that deployment to those devices. Same thing with users. We have a user database here. Now, all of these are then linked to groups. For example, I made a few additional users today in our restricted guests just for this very piece. And I'm sorry, Andrew, but you no longer are going to have access. And if you're watching this webinar, I do apologize, but I needed a guinea pig. So in this case, I'm going to delete it. Yes. And he's gone. This is a service-based user in this scenario. This is a cloud-based PPSK, meaning his access is now gone. He can no longer authenticate. And we require in this policy authentication every 30 minutes. So if he just authenticated, he can be connected for 30 minutes and then will immediately be kicked from the wireless. Or if he's at minute 28, he's got about 120 seconds of wireless access, and then he'll be kicked out. Again, ease of management and scalability, because this goes to all of our offices, all of our locations in production, and I could do it seamlessly and quickly. The last thing we'll show is, again, you saw that I made that change. I made that security policy change where I moved SMTP up one level from an access rule standpoint. All of these exclamation points mean that I made a change, and that change I made was that access rule. To show how quickly we can deploy this, this is multiple offices. We have 2 offices in this building, one that we call old and one that we call new. Now, if I were to click on this access point here, just for demonstration, this is an access point that currently is in the old office, and I'm pushing those updates. So that firewall access rule for restricted users that maybe was meant to stop SMTP but no longer is, has now been immediately pushed. So from a user standpoint, a rule standpoint, and a control standpoint, I have scalability and ease of management. I could push this to one device, or I could have clicked all devices and pushed it to everyone. If we go back to our slides here, and thank you for bearing with me on that live demo. Get my access back. We want to grade out PPSK just like we did everyone else. From a security standpoint, it definitely has high marks. The reason being, everybody has individual tunnels back to the access point. We can control the level of complexity of our password. And one thing that we didn't even get a chance to show in the live demo is that I can limit how many devices can use that PPSK. In our production environment, since we focused really on those guests, those restricted and rules, every production PPSK in our environment is linked to one authentication at a time, meaning that as soon as my laptop authenticates to the network, I can't use that same passphrase on my phone or an additional laptop. It is locked out. You also can add additional layers by linking it to specific Mac OUIs or MAC addresses, same as specific operating systems, basically saying that, you know, maybe we don't want laptops in our employee guest network. It's just for them to connect their Apple and Android devices to, you know, stream Spotify or Pandora while they're working. In that case, I can limit and say no laptops can connect because I don't want, you know, any type of laptop sending out, you know, spam and getting us blacklisted. There's control on multiple levels. Ease of management, it is, in our opinion, the easiest to manage. As you saw, not only from a rule standpoint, an updating standpoint, or a user standpoint, it's just as easy as enterprise wireless, and even easier to do additional pieces of control through visibility and through access, both in guest and production. And same with scalability. This can be deployed everywhere. And if you take certain steps to make sure that even if internet goes down, you still can have production access. If we lose internet in our office building, my lab can still authenticate, and I still have access to local resources such as a file server or a folder that maybe has a piece of information I still need or need to work on, even though I've lost internet access. Overall, we would give PPSK a clean A because it meets all three of our standards and finally starts to give us that extra gallon of water to fill up all three of our buckets. So if we look at final grades and one final review, obviously WEP we gave an F. WPA and WPA2 we gave a B-, and really that score was dedicated to WPA2. WPA, while used, I've seen used in a few very specific environments because of legacy devices, really should be using WPA2 if you don't want to go the enterprise route. WPA3 was an incomplete and in-process grade because it currently is still really in the research and production phase. WPA2 wireless is the highest scoring of your traditional neutral vendor wireless security solutions. And finally, PPSK through Aerohive allows what we feel to be the highest grade of security, ease of management, and scalability of all. And with that, I just want to say thank you again for everybody who has joined. And this is actually the real end of the presentation.
Thanks, Sam. We did really quickly get just one question. And the question is, if you are not using Aerohive and PPSK, what is your best option outside of those items?
Really, the best option is pushing a enterprise solution. I know with the radius server piece and scalability, it can be sometimes daunting and add more to what your IT team is managing. You know, let it be you have 10 sites. Well, is that 20 radius servers? You know, 2 at each site for failover and additional resources to what are those radius servers authenticating to? If you're truly serious about wireless production and you don't have a vendor solution like Aerohive, I would really always push for enterprise wireless. If you're small and you don't have the resources for those Radius servers and you don't use Active Directory and you're really an upstart business, use WPA2, that is okay, but please use a complex password and be sure to change it on a regular basis. And honestly, I would have my IT staff or person who's changing that password directly input those passwords to those devices. A lot of security, and this is with not only with wireless, but also from a firewall standpoint or anything that you do, it's always about security and production and how those two work in lockstep. And while sometimes being secure takes additional time, taking those extra steps, like constantly changing your WPA2 password or building out those Radius servers if you're a company that has Active Directory, has the resources to go enterprise, really does take you to the next level of ensuring that as wireless becomes a true production need, we have the proper steps in place to make sure that it also is secure, just like we would with our wired network. So short answer, Kara, because I know I'm a little long-winded, would be, if possible, I'd always go towards enterprise, wireless with 802.1x.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Sam, so much for that. And again, everybody, thank you for joining. We'll have the recording of the webinar available probably before the end of the week, so stay tuned for that. And if you have any additional follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to Sam directly if you have his contact information, or contact us at sales@cerdent.com. Thanks, and enjoy your day.
Thank you, everyone.